On a quiet Tuesday in Dayton, I called a plumber for a stubborn leak and braced for another small fix in a life that already felt patched together. When Mike stepped into my kitchen, tool bag in hand and kindness in his eyes, I didn't expect my heart to shift. He noticed a rainbow magnet on my fridge, looked at me, and simply said, "You too?" In that moment, the drip in the ceiling ended up revealing something deeper. I had spent years hiding in plain sight. When the plumber found out I was gay, everything changed. Unexpectedly, tenderly, beautifully, forever. If you find comfort in gentle, honest stories like this, please tap subscribe, leave a like, and share with someone who could use a little courage today. Comment, "You're not alone," to lift others up. Your support helps this community grow and keeps these heart-forward stories coming. Thank you, truly. The first drip started on a Sunday night, a quiet tap-tap from the ceiling, above my sink as if the house itself was clearing its throat, reminding me that even well-loved places need care. I stood beneath it with a mixing bowl in my hands, then laughed at myself, me at 46 in my robe and slippers, playing goalie against a temperamental piece of plaster. I live in Dayton, Ohio, in a small, square house that looks like a friendly face. 2 windows as eyes and a porch that smiles. I bought it after my long relationship ended. 15 years with a good man named Corey who moved to Seattle when his job changed. The breakup was kind, but the loneliness that followed felt like a cold wind that found every crack. I patched the cracks I could see. I painted the front door. I planted tulips. I learned how to make a respectable pot roast. But some leaks are deeper. By Tuesday, the drip had joined a friend. I tried the practical steps, turned off the upstairs bathroom valve, laid towels, checked YouTube. There's a moment when you realize you need help. And the older I get, the more I try to honor that moment instead of muscling through. So I called Lawson & Sons Plumbing, a name I'd seen on a weathered truck around town, and a steady voice. Told me they'd send someone between 10 and noon. At 10:08, there was a knock. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened the door. "Morning," he said. "I'm Mike Lawson." He had the kind of handshake that was warm without trying too hard. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, with the kind of face you'd trust to watch. "Your dog." A gray t-shirt with the company logo, a baseball cap with the bill curved just so. He glanced past me with a quick scan, a professional taking in the terrain, and then looked back to me like a question mark. "Kitchen," I said, stepping aside. The ceiling decided it wanted to make an announcement. He chuckled, low and easy. "They do that." He set his tool bag on the floor with the gentleness of someone who respects his tools. That detail stuck with me. He moved in a way that telegraphed patience and competence, the kind of presence that makes you breathe a little easier. He tested the faucet, asked me a few questions, and made his way upstairs, his boots thumping softly on the steps. "You live here alone?" he asked over his shoulder. "Conversational, not prying." "I do," I said, "unless you count a half-dozen succulents and a basil plant that I keep nursing back from the brink." "Sounds like you're doing something right," he said. We both smiled, simple, human, the kind of warmth that can fit in a single room. Mike was under the kitchen sink when it happened, flat on his back, a flashlight in his teeth, one hand bracing the pipe and the other reaching for a wrench. I was leaning on the counter, making small talk that felt almost like prayer, about scheduling, about how rainy it had been, about a grocery store that replaced its old neon sign with something modern that didn't feel as friendly. He slid out to grab a pair of pliers, set them down carefully, and then paused like his eye had caught on something. He was looking at my fridge. There are magnets on it the way there are rings on a tree, little markers of the life inside. A magnet from a lighthouse in Maine where Corey and I once watched the sunrise, another from the Cincinnati Art Museum, a photo strip of me and Jasmine, my best friend, making faces in a booth at a street fair, and a small rainbow magnet in the corner, sleek and proud. He didn't stare. He didn't point. He just acknowledged. His gaze touched it and then flicked to me, and in that split second I felt them. All the years of shrinking myself in small moments, the careful calculations, in service of safety. You too? He said, gentle, like asking if I took my coffee black. There was no edge to it, no punchline waiting. The room did not hold its breath because he was already exhaling kindness into it. I took my hand off the counter. Yeah, I said, steady. Me too. He regarded me and nodded. Good. Makes fixing a leak feel a little more like fixing a home, he said. He slid back under the sink before I could answer, and I stood there feeling a surprising warmth climb into my chest. It was such a small moment. It was also, somehow, everything. I'd always said the right words, even to myself, that I wasn't hiding. I was out to friends. My mom knew and loved me. My co-workers knew. But there are still places, even now, in the smaller corners of the Midwest, and in the quieter aisles of hardware stores, and in certain conversations at the barber, where you measure yourself. You decide how much to give. When a plumber in your kitchen catches sight of a rainbow and responds with generosity, your body notices. Mine did. It felt like something inside me sat down and took its boots off. He fixed the immediate problem. Something about a loose compression fitting behind the dishwasher line and a bit of tired pipe that needed love. He explained it in plain language, made sure I understood, and told me what he'd watch for if it were his kitchen. That's what struck me again and again. He spoke like someone who wanted me to feel confident, not dumb. There was a care in it, a steadying hand. Now your upstairs tub's got a slow gasket, he said, tapping a spot on the wall with his knuckle. Not urgent, but it'll nag you, like a song stuck in your head. How much nagging are we talking? I asked. Enough to make you roll your eyes every Monday morning, he said, smiling. But we can set a time next week to take a look if you want. I booked it. He wrote it down on his clipboard with one of those sturdy pens that look like they could survive a garage fire. His handwriting was neat, careful. He tore off the invoice and slid it toward me. He glanced back at the fridge on his way out, then at me. He cleared his throat, not awkward but purposeful, like choosing the right socket from a set. My kid brother Tyler, he said, thumb hooking into his back pocket. He's gay, lives down in Cincinnati with his husband. I learned a lot, mostly how much I didn't know until I shut up and listened. Tyler's lucky to have you, I said. He shook his head. I'm lucky he let me learn. We stood there in that soft, good silence, the kind that feels like a porch light left on. Then he tipped his cap and headed down the walkway, and I watched him go, feeling changed by a repair that had nothing to do with pipes. That night, I called my mom. She's 72 and sharp as a tack with a garden that could be on the cover of a magazine and a laugh that could forgive anything. I told her about the plumber and the magnet and the kindness, and she hummed, the way she does when she's thinking deep. Honey, she said, there are people who see the world as a series of leaks to complain about, and people who see it as a house you care for. Sounds like he's the second kind. I think so, I said. And how's your heart? She asked. Unexpectedly hopeful, I said, and we both smiled into the line. He came the following Wednesday to look at the upstairs tub. I had swept the stairs, set out a clean hand towel, and, without thinking much about it, brewed an extra pot of coffee. The smell drifted through the house, warm and inviting. When he arrived, hair damp from rain, I offered him a mug. I won't say no, he said, hands wrapping around the ceramic like it was December instead of spring. Smells like Sunday morning. We walked upstairs, me telling him about the creaky third stair that always announces you like a royal trumpeter, him listening with half his attention on the tub's moody faucet. He knelt and tested the pipes, his movements efficient. He hummed, tightened a coupling, loosened another. You're good at this, I said, surprised at the softness in my voice. I get paid to be good at it, he said, smiling. But I like being good at it, My dad started the company. He had 4 arms like tree trunks and a heart that wanted every sink in Montgomery County to sing. He taught me that people think they're calling you for a fix, but what they want is reassurance. What happens when you can't assure them? I asked, the question slipping out of me like a truth. You tell the truth gently, he said. And then you sit with them in the discomfort until it's not so sharp. He said that, then shifted to explain the gasket situation with the same tiny mercies of speech. He showed me how to turn off the main line in case of emergency, placed my hand on the valve and said, "You'll remember better this way." He was right. I did. On his way out, he saw the books by my couch, a small stack, a gardening guide, a novel, and a memoir by a gay author who wrote about learning to inhabit himself. He picked it up, read the first line, and nodded. "Any good?" he asked. "Like a hand on your shoulder?" I said. "Makes you feel less alone." He looked at the cover again. I used to think being alone was easier because it was simpler. Then I realized it just meant I didn't have help lifting heavy things. He put the book down carefully, like it was a tool. That gesture made my throat tighten. That Saturday, I stopped by a little coffee shop on Wayne Avenue. It's the sort of place with plants in every window and a chalkboard that always says something sincere. I was reading when I heard a familiar voice order a medium Americano. No, room. I looked up. There he was, cap in hand this time, hair a little unruly, blue shirt that made his eyes seem lighter. "Daniel?" he said, recognizing me, and my name sounded different in his voice, like he'd sanded down the rough edges. "Mike," I said. "Hey." We kept it simple. We talked about the weather, about the Dayton Dragons starting their season, about how April tricks you with one warm day and one cold day back to back. Then the conversation slipped into something deeper, as if it had been waiting for us. Family, change, how to forgive yourself for not knowing any better when you really didn't. He told me about his divorce. He and his ex-wife, Kara, had married. Young. 2 great kids, Olivia, 13, who wanted to be a veterinarian, and Eli, 11, who loved building elaborate structures out of anything he could stack. He'd realized, late, but not too late, that he had learned to be good in a life that didn't quite fit, the way you get good at walking in a pair of boots that rub. "I haven't figured everything out," he said, looking at his coffee. "But I know I want my kids to see their old man be honest and kind." "It's enough to start with," I said. We parted with no promises, just an understanding that when someone makes your life quieter in the best way, you pay attention. The third time he came to the house, it wasn't for a plumbing issue. It was because my old porch light decided it was done, and the replacement fixture I bought didn't match the wiring I found behind it. I called him with a sheepish laugh. "It's not strictly plumbing," he said, "but I like porches." He arrived at dusk, the sky painted in those Midwestern watercolors, lavender, peach, the soft blue that comes just before stars. He stood on the ladder, called down instructions to me like we were dancing. "Pass me that flathead screwdriver. Hold the fixture a little higher. There you go." When he flipped the switch and the light sprang to life, warm and yellow, it felt like a small blessing. We sat on the steps with cold bottles of iced tea, watching the neighborhood do its evening shuffle. Mrs. Whitaker from across the street walked her little terrier, Harold. She's 80 and fierce, with lipstick always, on even to collect the mail. She waved. We waved back. A couple pushed a stroller. Somewhere, a television murmured baseball. "Do you ever go to Pride?" he asked, simple, as if asking if I liked my tea sweet or unsweet. His voice was neutral, curious, safe. "Sometimes," I said. "I like Columbus Pride. Lots of families. I like the looks on the faces of kids who are seeing themselves everywhere." "Yeah," he said, smiling into the distance. "Tyler says the same. He invited me once, but I said no. Fear of crowds, maybe fear of something else. Not sure anymore." "What would happen if you said yes?" I asked. Maybe I'd just stand on a sidewalk and watch Joy walk past, he said. Sounds pretty good. We let that sit. There's a kind of silence that arranges your thoughts. For you. He finished his tea and looked at me, not rushed. Daniel, he said, I want to ask if you'd like to get dinner sometime. Not because I fixed your pipes, because talking with you feels like taking a deep breath. My heart did that stutter. Fear, hope, old instincts trying to negotiate with what I wanted now. The old instinct said, keep it easy, keep it neighborly. The new courage said, if a gentle thing presents itself, receive it gently. I'd like that, I said. Very much. Good, he said, and grinned. He had one of those smiles that reached all the way up into his eyes, softening everything. We chose a small place on 5th Street that does meatloaf like your grandmother if your grandmother had a culinary degree. The waitress recognized Mike. He helped fix their pipes after a winter freeze 2 years ago. This man saved our mashed potatoes, she declared, which is high praise. We talked like we always did, with curiosity, humor, respect. He asked about my work. I'm an outreach coordinator for a health clinic that focuses on seniors and folks who don't always get the care they deserve. I give talks at community centers about fall prevention and medication safety and how to advocate for yourself in the exam room. That trusted doctor voice, it's something I practice. Speak calmly. Offer information that helps. Leave room for people to ask questions. He said he could hear it in me. You sound like you'd read the side effects and tell people the ones that really matter, he said. I try, I said. I think a lot about dignity. He talked about his crew, how he hires people who don't, flinch at hard work, and who look customers in the eye. He told me about a summer job with Habitat for Humanity that turned into an annual habit, how he liked the way an old house could be a map of someone's hope if you learned how to read. That we were careful with one another and not precious. When he reached for his water glass and our hands brushed, there was a live wire of possibility. When he told me he'd never been in a relationship with a man, he said it with respect, not like an apology, but a fact of where he was and what he was open to. I told him I wasn't in the business of teaching someone how to be kind or good. He already was those things. That we could learn everything else together, slowly, at a humane pace. He nodded, eyes steady. I want slow, he said. I want to know what matters. On the way out, we walked past a little bookstore. In the window, there was a display for a poetry collection. He stopped. Do you read this stuff? He asked, half teasing. Only on days with a sky like this, I said, glancing up. He laughed, delighted. He pulled the door open and said, Show me one you love. Inside, it smelled like dust and paper and a bit like hope. I found a poem about building a life with both hands, about dignity in labor, about love that looks like showing up. We stood shoulder to shoulder, not touching, reading. He let out a breath that sounded like relief. I like that it's not trying to impress anybody, he said. Yeah, I said. Me too. Outside, he walked me to my car and paused. We didn't kiss, not yet, but he took my hand for a moment, just a moment, and there was something in that touch that felt like a vow. Word gets around in a town like ours, but it didn't get around fast, and it didn't need to. We didn't belong to gossip. We belonged to small rituals. Coffee on Saturday. Watching Olivia's softball game and cheering at the right volume. Staying for Eli's Lego tour afterward and asking questions that prove you were paying attention. Sunday afternoons at my mom's, eating her famous lemon bars on the porch while she asked Mike about his mother's recipe for cornbread and he asked if he could get her Basil to stop looking discouraged in August heat. Mom pulled me aside one day while Mike and Eli debated the merits of installing a gray water system as a summer project. She gripped my elbow, the way she does when she's about to say something true. Honey, he treats you like you're the most important thing in the room, she said. Pay attention to how your shoulders look when he's around. They're lower, like you're not bracing. I teared up. Is it that obvious? To a mother, she said, smiling. As obvious as sunlight. We were careful with his kids with what we named and when. Children know what kindness feels like, and they know when an adult is doing his level best. When Olivia rolled her eyes at a boy who made a joke that sounded like an echo of something his dad says at home, Mike spoke up, firm but fair. Not funny, he said. We don't use people's lives like punchlines. Not in this house. The boy flushed. Olivia smirked, then looked at me with something like gratitude. It felt like a tiny anchor settling into the riverbed of our life. At work, a colleague asked about my weekend, and I mentioned going to a baseball game with Mike and the kids. Is that the plumber? She asked, sipping her coffee. I nodded, braced without meaning to, and she said, Good for you. He's cute in a grown-up way. And honey, he fixed my garbage disposal in 20 minutes flat. Keep him. We laughed, and some of the old fear untangled further. It wasn't all porch lights and lemon bars. Life never is. One Thursday, Mike came home from a job site looking like he was carrying extra weight. He called me, voice steady but tight, and asked if he could come over. When he arrived, he stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. Greg said something today, he said. Greg is one of his crew. Good with copper, bad with patience. We were at the truck, and he said he had a no politics rule for his customers' homes, and then asked if that included gay stuff. I felt that old drop in my stomach, the one that used to mean protect yourself, disappear. Mike must have seen it in my face because he reached out, fingertip brushing the back of my hand. I told him my rule is respect, he said, that if he can't work in a house without making somebody's life small, he shouldn't be working for me. He asked if I was one of them. I told him I'm a man who loves his kids and wants them to see him be brave. What did he say? I asked. He muttered, Mike said, mouth tight. But he finished the job well. I told him we'd talk tomorrow about expectations, about how we make sure our company feels safe to everyone who invites us in. I nodded, throat thick. I'm sorry you had to do that, I said, and I'm grateful you did. You don't have to carry the part that's about me, he said gently. That's mine, but I want you to know that when I say I want slow and I want honest, I mean out loud. I'm not hiding you like a spare key under the mat. We sat with it, the mix of anger and relief, the knowledge that safety is something you make together every day. The next afternoon, he told Greg he expected respect for every customer. Full stop. Greg complained. Mike reminded him that belonging here means doing right. Greg took a long lunch to think. He came back with mumbled words that were not an apology but also not a refusal. Over time, he got better. Maybe because he saw the boss meant it. Maybe because he saw that a no politics rule doesn't work when what you're calling politics is people. It happened on a Thursday in June. The forecast had been wrong again, and a sudden summer rain ripped across the neighborhood right. As Mike pulled up in his truck, he ran to the porch, laughing, shirt damp, eyes bright. I handed him a towel, and as he rubbed his hair and looked at me, there was that shared understanding that has its own gravity. Are we still doing slow? He asked, the gentlest question. Yes, I said, stepping closer. Slow like savoring. He leaned in, and I met him, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. Not fireworks you can see from 4 counties away, but the quieter miracle of a light coming on in a room you didn't know you needed. He kissed like he fixed things, attentive, patient, listening. I put my hand on his chest and felt the steady drum of his heart, and that beat sounded like home. We pulled back and stood there, a little dazed and happy, the rain drumming the porch roof like applause. Okay, he said, almost whispering, as if we were handling something sacred. Okay, we ordered pizza. We watched an old movie that didn't ask too much of us. We sat close but not tangled. His hand found mine once, then again, and neither of us had to perform. It was one of the first nights in a very long time that I fell asleep without the companionship of worry. He said yes to Columbus Pride that year. We drove up on a Saturday, the sky in that impossibly bright June mood, the kind of day where strangers compliment each other's sunglasses. He wore a faded baseball cap and a red t-shirt that said "Be kind" in big letters. I wore a shirt the color of the ocean with a small rainbow at the pocket, more for me than for anyone else. We stood on the sidewalk and watched joy walk past. Young couples with hands clasped tight as lifelines, older folks in folding chairs, some with canes, some with tears, some with both, all of them radiating that particular relief of being seen. Parents with signs that said, "Free mom hugs" and "Free dad hugs," and every time someone took one, the hugger's face cracked open into something that could soften every hard place in you. Mike didn't try to be something he wasn't. He didn't paint his face or shout. He stood and absorbed. He looked around at the families and said under his breath, "That's what it looks like." He meant the future. He meant gentleness. He meant his kids someday walking into any room knowing their father has made safety a habit, not a slogan. After the parade, we found a diner with pancakes the size of hubcaps. He cut a precise triangle and said, "I think I just saw 1,000 different ways to be happy." "There are at least 1,001, I said. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, brief and sure, like we were making a pact we had already kept. Love is a house you work on forever, and not because it's broken, but because it's yours. We learned each other's rhythms. He gets quiet when he's thinking, and if you try to pull words out of him too soon, you're just mining rock. But if you wait, a spring appears. I talk when I'm nervous, and sometimes I narrate the cooking process like I'm hosting a show. He smiles and hands me the paprika. We both say sorry when we need to, and we both try to say thank you more than that. We did real work, too. We installed a grab bar in my mom's bathroom because she won't admit the hallway rug is a tripping hazard. We built a ramp for Mrs. Whitaker's front steps, so Harold wouldn't have to be carried like a very annoyed loaf of bread. Mike taught me how to change a P-trap without swearing. I taught him how to make lemon bars that hold together but melt in your mouth. At the clinic, I found myself telling a new kind of story when I talked about health and dignity with seniors. I'd say, "Ask for help when you need it. Sometimes the best medicine is another pair of hands." I'd think of Mike's hands on a wrench, then on my shoulder, and how each had steadied me in a different way. We had hard days, too. A night when Olivia cried because a friend's parent told her she couldn't come over if your dad's, you know. Mike held his daughter and told her that some people are scared of what they don't understand, and their fear doesn't get to decide who she is or who we are. He called the parent the next morning and spoke calmly. He didn't shout, because shouting is a way of not trusting yourself to be heard. He said his piece. The other parent apologized halfway through in the awkward way of someone bumping into their own growth. Olivia watched her father choose dignity, and that mattered. Another day, my ex Corey came through town on business and texted to ask if I wanted to grab coffee. I told Mike. He said, "How do you feel?" Not, "What are you going to do?" I told him I was grateful for what Corey had been to me and that I didn't want to have a coffee that lived in the past. He nodded and kissed the top of my head. "That sounds right," he said. I sent Corey a message wishing him well. We both knew it was the kindest version of goodbye. By November, the house smelled like onions and thyme, and my mother had assigned tasks like a benevolent general. Mash, mix, stir, taste. Mike stood at the stove, a dish towel over his shoulder like a uniform. Olivia whipped the potatoes with unnecessary enthusiasm. Eli tended to the rolls with the seriousness of a jewel thief. We went around the table naming what we were grateful for. My mother said, "Neighbors who look out for one another." Olivia said, "The fact that my history teacher says women and men instead of just men." Eli said, "Screws," and then elaborated, "They make stuff stay." We all pretended not to be charmed out of our minds. When it was my turn, I looked at Mike. His face was open, confident, not braced. My shoulders were low, like my mother had noticed months ago. I said, "I'm grateful for kindness that arrives disguised as everyday life." He squeezed my knee under the table. Later, when I stood at the sink with my hands in warm, soapy water, he dried the plates. That's when I realized that love is 1,000 unglamorous chores done with the right person, and that the right person makes even a sink full of dishes feel like proof that you've eaten well and together. Winter came early and hard. Pipes froze 2 streets over, and Mike was out at all hours, his truck a familiar sight at lit windows and frantic doorways. He'd come by my place late at night, stoop-shouldered with fatigue, and I'd hand him a bowl of chili and a piece of bread, and he'd say, "You're saving me." And I'd say, "We're saving each other," and neither of us would correct it. One night, the old radiator in my bedroom made a sound like a dragon sighing, and the temperature started to drop. He set his bag down at the foot of the bed and got to work. It wasn't his usual territory. Hydronics, he said, shrugging. But he knew the language. He bled the lines and coaxed warmth back into the house. We stood there watching the thermostat tick up like it was a sunrise. "I used to try to do everything on my own," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It made me feel competent until it made me feel small." "What changed?" I asked. He looked at me. "You handed me a cup of coffee and didn't make it complicated," he said. "Turns out I needed a lot more of that in my life." We crawled under the quilt, fully clothed, the kind of night where closeness is mostly about body heat and breath. I listened to his heartbeat again, the metronome of a life I was learning by ear. He fell asleep in 3 minutes like people who work hard do. I stayed awake a little longer, the house creaking as if settling into itself, and thought, if anyone listening feels too old for this, please know you are not. Good love is ageless. Relief is ageless. Relief is a kind of love, too. In late February, there was a knock that sounded like news. I opened the door to see Mrs. Whitaker in a winter coat the color of cherries, Harold tucked under one arm like a gray parachute. "My niece is visiting," she said. "She brought her fiancé, a woman fiancé. I thought of you. Is that okay?" The world tilts in small ways, and you realize sometimes that you have been a pebble in someone else's avalanche of courage. I smiled and stepped aside. "Come in where it's warm," I said. We made tea. We talked about how Harold hates snow, like it's a personal insult. We talked about how a winter wedding can be beautiful if you lean into candles and soup. We talked about how love, when it's good, looks like being each other's safest place. Before they left, Mrs. Whitaker put on her gloves, looked at me and at Mike and said, "I'm glad you're in the neighborhood. Makes it better to look at." We laughed, but I felt something settle in. Representation sounds like a buzzword until you realize it's just a slogan for someone who looks like you being safe in public. It's the opposite of alone. It's a porch light for somebody else. In March, the tulips I planted in the bare time after Corey left came up with a confidence I envied. I propped open the screen door to let in good air. Mike planted 2 blueberry bushes in the yard with Eli, who declared them future pie providers. Olivia painted a birdhouse and hung it from the maple. Mike and I had been cautious about the language we used. Partner felt right eventually. Boyfriend felt teenaged and kind of charming when we said it, so sometimes we did. We didn't rush to name beyond what we could hold. And then one Saturday we were at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd fixed a loose screw the first day, and where we'd shared 1,000 small breakfasts since. He looked at me like he was reading something written in the space between us. "Come live with me," he said. "Not because it's convenient, because I want a life where the question, 'Are you staying for dinner?' is always yes," I thought, of my mother's advice, of my own heartbeat, of the hundreds of tiny kindnesses we had exchanged like notes. I thought of the way my house had stopped feeling like a space I survived and started feeling like a place I belonged. I thought of his kids, who were already using my couch as extra seating and my fridge as auxiliary snack storage. Yes, I said, and we both exhaled the same laugh, the one that sounds like recognition. We spent weekends blending a life. He moved a set of wrenches into my garage, next to the box marked Christmas. I moved my cookbooks onto his kitchen shelf between the cereal and the coffee beans. We measured rooms with our arms, not just with tape. We told the kids gently, with time for them to ask anything they needed, and they did. Practical questions about whose room would be whose, whether Harold could visit whenever he wanted, whether we could keep the porch swing. The answers were yes, yes, and absolutely yes. When a plumber finds out you're gay, it shouldn't be a plot twist. It should be an ordinary piece of information that makes it easier to do what you're both there to do. Fix a leak, build trust, stand in a kitchen with the right amount of light. And yet, for me, it became the pivot point of an entire chapter of my life. Everything changed. Not because Mike said, "You too," but because that small, generous question became a habit in our home. You too? Do you want to be heard? You too? Do you want to be safe? You too? Do you want dinner left in the oven when you're late? Your favorite mug, clean and waiting, your name said with care? Everything changed because I allowed it to. Because courage showed up wearing a ball cap and carrying a wrench and offered me honesty and slow, and I said yes. Because my mother welcomed love that looked different from her own, but felt the same in all the important ways. Because his children taught me that acceptance spoken out loud is a stronger house than quiet tolerance. Because we practiced being gentle in public, so other people felt like maybe they could practice too. There are big moments. The kiss on the porch, the Thanksgiving table, the Columbus parade, but the secret is that the smallest rituals did, the heavy lifting. The coffee poured into the cup you know I like. The hand that braced my back as I stretched for the top shelf. The text that said, "Checking the water heater in the basement. Want tea when I come up?" Love is a series of tiny assurances that add up to a life. So if you're listening to this, and your heart is doing what mine did that first day, picking up speed at the possibility of being fully known, let me say this like a trusted clinician, talking you through the next step. Breathe. If you can, find a person who treats your life like a room to be warmed, not a puzzle to be solved. If you've already found them, let yourself be known. If you haven't, trust that kindness is not a scarce resource. Sometimes it knocks when you're staring at a leak and hands you a towel. Mike still keeps that rainbow magnet in his line of sight whenever he's in our kitchen. He says it's a reminder that the simplest symbols carry the heaviest meanings for people who learn to look for them. I keep a small wrench on my desk where I do bills, a little joke, and a little prayer. It reminds me that good hands can fix more than pipes. We're not perfect. No one is. We raise our voices sometimes and then lower them together. We forget an anniversary of a first inside joke and then re-celebrate it with pancakes. We do the long work. We choose slow. We choose honest. We choose to be the kind of men we needed when we were younger. Steady, kind, not afraid to say out loud what we love. Everything changed after the plumber found out I was gay. Not because being gay changed, but because the house of my life finally felt like it had the right person at the door, knocking softly, saying, "You ready to build?" And the answer, every day, is yes.